Well, I am so excited to be here with my friend Andrew Lemon. Andrew has been just such an integral part of our mission in Mexico and Latin America. And I'm excited to talk to Andrew today a little bit about, business in Latin America and sourcing and culture there. And he's over here sitting in his hammock. He looks so comfortable. I was like, oh, it's so Mexico today, right? Super relaxed, so we're just going to have a really great conversation today and hope to glean a little bit more about what Mexico has to offer and who is a good fit for doing business in Mexico. So welcome, everyone. Let's get to it. Andrew, first of all, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about you and what brought you to Mexico?
Great. So when I was studying my undergrad in Texas in UT Arlington, one of my best friends was from Mexico, and during the summers he would invite me down, and I would come down and visit. And eventually I finished school. I was working somewhere back in Dallas, and said, what if I go to Mexico and teach English and have a little adventure down there? And that's what I did. I spent the rest of my 20s teaching in Mexico, and then the university that I was eventually teaching at offered me a scholarship to do my MBA there, and that's what I did. So that was kind of a diving into the business side of things in Mexico, and in that perspective, that wasn't really who I was. I studied linguistics, and I was an English professor, but then I kind of pivoted into business and started to see, hey, there are some opportunities where maybe I could be a part and help people, advance their business. So that's eventually what I was able to do. I'll continue on a little bit of my story. I did go back to the US, and so around 2014, I moved back to the US. I was working for a tech startup, maybe a little bit past startup, but that was my intro to e-commerce. I was working for that company and kind of felt bogged down and didn't have this chance to travel. I just spent most of my time in an office or an apartment in Dallas, and said, what else could I do with my life? And eventually I had the opportunity to be a part of another e-commerce project with a friend of mine, where we were sourcing products in China and selling them on Amazon. And we were successful enough that I could do that full time. And then eventually we sold that company. And during that time, I decided I would move back to Mexico, because it was a place where I enjoy it personally. I enjoy the life that I'm able to afford here. But also I did see opportunities. I said, well, why are we sourcing everything in China if we have Mexico right here? And there are reasons why. But I do think that things are starting to change. It's going to diversify, and we're going to be doing a lot more business in Mexico in a lot of different ways.
That's amazing. So that's how I met you, obviously, was through e-commerce channels. One of our mutual friends introduced us. And so I was just so stoked to learn that, you were already involved in Mexico, and, and you already had some e-commerce knowledge, and our mission was to build the bridge. I mean, we have a bridge kind of, but there's not really a sourcing bridge, right? There's not necessarily this e-commerce sourcing bridge between the United States and the rest of the world and Mexico. A lot of people just aren't aware of what's available in Mexico. They aren't really sure how to find manufacturers. They aren't sure what capabilities are there. And that's what we found too. I would visit Mexico all the time. I'm in Texas, and I would visit Mexico all the time, and I would see all these amazing products that were made in Mexico. And I was like, wait a minute, where are these manufacturers? Like, where is this happening? Because the only thing that any of us had heard really about Mexico was vehicles, right? Automotive, that kind of stuff was big in Mexico. And so I was like, wow, is there space for e-commerce buyers to go to Mexico and source? And you said, you were wondering the same thing. Why is everyone sourcing from China and not looking at alternative destinations. And can you talk a little bit about your experience and kind of, why you think that is, why you think people don't know a lot about Mexico?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think when most Americans travel to Mexico, they're going to the beach, right? And maybe going to the border town, just have a little fun. And you kind of connect that that's the image that people have, as well as kind of what you see on the media. So people don't really expect there to be the type of economic development that is in Mexico. I mean, we're from the United States, which is by some accounts the richest country in the world, and we have Mexico but beside us, and we look at it as a poor country, but Mexico is actually a rich country on a worldwide level, right? So there is a lot going on. There are a lot of people with a lot of factories, and there is logistics, and all of these things exist. The difference, though, is that China made a very concerted effort to change their economy starting in the 1970s, right? And they never have been a place with a lot of raw material. They've been a place that said, how are we going to be a part of the rest of the world? It's going to be by manufacturing. So from that point in time, starting in the 70s, they were looking for opportunities to work with large companies to manufacture goods there. And then they caught on to the trend of, oh, but I can, make small orders for these individual sellers. And eventually the Amazon ecosystem was something that they plugged into, to the extent that now they're the sellers, right? At the first, we were happy. Hey, we can get the Chinese manufacturers to make this, and eventually they started making things too, but they weren't doing such a great job, and then eventually they kind of caught up. Mexico's economy was still very isolated until NAFTA, and that seems, I guess that's 30 years ago now, so it seems like, well, that's been a while, but it's still only 30 years ago, just the 90s, right? In Mexico, they produced goods for their own local market. They didn't import that much, and they didn't export that much. And they haven't made that switch as much to say, hey, what can we make for the US? So that's part of it. The other part of it is a lot of these things that we're seeing when you go to Mexico and you see, wow, these are some fantastic ceramic bowls. This is some amazing, woodwork, amazing leather work. Some of those are traditions, businesses, for lack of a better word, economic activity that goes back maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, that people in a certain region of Mexico have been manufacturing those goods. And so it's generation after generation. And so having to do something different and saying, okay, now I need to change this. I need to scale it. I need to seek, commercial partners in the United States. That's just slowly but surely happening. Whereas in China, it was kind of pushed. And another thing about that is, in China, because things are very much controlled by the state government, both in a sense of it's a powerful authoritarian government, and because the culture is a little bit more collective in China, the government has pushed the economy in that direction, whereas that's not necessarily happening yet in Mexico. Everybody's still kind of doing their own thing. But I do think there is a great opportunity. That doesn't mean that the level of craftsmanship isn't there. That doesn't mean that there isn't the possibility to do it. The big difference is, I can still speak from experience. Everybody knows they can log on to certain websites and say, hey, I'm looking for, sunglasses that look like smiley faces. I'm looking for plastic flower pots. I'm looking for this. I'm looking for that. And you're likely going to find somebody that's either producing that very item or something similar, and you can start the conversation. A lot of us, myself, have developed relationships with people in China that all I have to do is jump on Skype at their, time of the day, jump on about 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, can you help me find this? And they're going to do it, because it's a habit, it's a business that they've developed and they're doing. In Mexico, if someone says, hey, Andrew, I want to source this, I want to source that, it's going to take me a lot longer to find anything that comes close to that. It's a lot more like, okay, you want something that's made out of that material. Well, I know somebody that works with this other material. Maybe they know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody.
Yeah, and it's just because, you know, you talked about 30 years ago, you know, that's when NAFTA started. But the reason is not because, like you said, it's not that we can't find those products in Mexico. We can find nearly everything. What surprised me is, you know, I take people to Canton Fair, which is the largest sourcing exposition in the world that happens in China twice a year. And, you know, there's over 60,000 manufacturers at this trade show from multiple categories. And most e-commerce buyers go for phase 2 of Canton Fair. And what that is like your gifts, your consumable items, your toys, wood, household goods, home and garden, you know, that kind of thing. But what I really was surprised by in Mexico is that a lot of these very same things that I could source in China at the Canton Fair during phase 2, I could also find in very nice quality in Mexico. And what you'll notice if, you know, and this is kind of the latest hack that I've been using to find contacts in Mexico, is there's a ton of trade shows in Mexico. You're not going to find a multi-category trade show until now because we've started EvoLatam, but you will find a trade show in your category. So I had a client reach out to me the other day, and he makes metal products out of metal that were cut metal, right? And, you know, he currently sources from China. And again, you know, we're not trying to move everybody from China. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to show that there is opportunity in Mexico, and there are benefits to sourcing from Mexico. So we'll get into that. But he contacted me and said, you know, Amy, do you know anybody that that makes these products? And sure enough, what I did is I just went and looked for trade shows for metal products in Mexico, and there was huge expos. And when I was out at Cintermex in Monterrey, looking at scouting our next venue for EvoLatam, I saw there was a huge plastics trade show with injection molding, and one of my products is made in the USA out of plastic. And I was so excited to see that. I just went into that trade show in Mexico and just started, like, you know, it was huge. It was amazing. And so many manufacturers, so much great stuff. And even our last EvoLatam in Mexico City, there was a trade show going on in at the World Trade Center, that same venue at the same time. So there's a ton of trade, there's a ton of manufacturers, there's a ton of products available. And that's, you know, a good way to explore the availability and the types of manufacturers, to go to those trade show websites and look, and you'll see. But the difference is that the relationships are more important, right? You talked, Andrew, 30 years ago, right? NAFTA happened, and that's where we started building the bridge. But a lot of products are exported now, like grocery, health and beauty. Here in Texas, on my grocery shelves, there's a lot of stuff made in Mexico. So that's great, that's happening, but we're just starting to see the emergence of other categories now starting to be exported. So it's very important for people to realize that 30 years ago, China was also brand new. I mean, if you went to China 30 years ago, like, you had to do the same thing. You had to, it wasn't that the products weren't available. It wasn't that manufacturers weren't available, but you had to develop relationships. You had to figure out who was who and find them and shake hands. And even today in China, you're going to have a totally better experience if you go in person and you develop those relationships than if you are just sourcing blindly on websites like Alibaba and you've never met your supplier. You're going to get totally different pricing. You're going to get a totally different experience when you develop those relationships. And what we found in Mexico is that relationships are really, really important, and the people are very warm and friendly. So can we talk about some of the benefits of when we do source from Mexico? Can we talk about some of the benefits of that? So we no longer have NAFTA, but we do still have free trade. There's a new type of agreement. I forgot what the new one is called. It's like,
I can't remember. They kind of simplified it. It's just like, I think it's called a North American, well, what was it? North American Free Trade Agreement. Free Trade Agreement of the Americas or something like that.
Yeah, because now it's like Canada isn't, Canada,
Yeah.
well, North America is Canada and the US, but I think Canada's in the name now too. It's like
Yeah.
MCA. It's something MCA, which is like Mexico, Canada, America, right? And so if 70% or more of your product is made in Mexico, then you're able to not pay any tariffs. You have complete free trade on that.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage. And just the logistics. I mean, just the fact is like, this is like a humble brag or whatever, but I was actually sailing in the San Francisco Bay a few months ago. A friend has a boat out there, and just seeing all of these ships that are just sitting there waiting, right? And that's the circumstance right now. Everything that's coming in through the West Coast from China, there's still a backlog. And during the same time that that's happening, I've had products that, the supplier lets me know, hey, Andrew, these are going to be ready tomorrow. What's the shipping? Okay, cool. Let me get you the information about the shipping, sending something through DHL or whatever. And yeah, it's in Amazon. It's checked in a week, or less. So, I mean, that's huge, because even when China was normal, you were talking about months. So, there's that advantage. And even if it's just kind of the product development phase, you have the opportunity to send it to me. It's here in 2 or 3 days. I can look at what you made. I can touch it, or heck, certainly in my case, I can go over there, and wherever you are in the US, it's just a couple-hour flight to, whether you want to go to León, you want to go to to Tijuana, you want to come to Mexico City. And, I think that's a huge advantage. The challenge that we could say is, in China, they've already figured this out, and they already understand, they know who Amazon sellers are. So they know, here's somebody that's going to ask me for 500 units of a product, and I've already worked with somebody like this, or somebody else that I know in my industry has worked with other individuals like this, and I'm going to work with Amy and make 500 units for her. And if she sells them, she's going to come back and ask for more, or she's going to say, this was a good supplier, I'm going to source something else with them. In Mexico, that's new. That's not something that most people have experience with. They're used to, like I said, it could be something that basically, it's evolved over the years, but basically goes back 100 years. So a lot of factories that make, really nice things, maybe not talking about the highest, most industrial things, but definitely things that you could be selling online. They're used to selling to these individual, I'm trying to think of what we would call them, but just people who would sell something on the street, people who would be selling something on the street or in a plaza somewhere,
like vendors or small retailers or kiosks, or I mean, and that's where I found a lot of these great products in Mexico.
Exactly.
Was at these smaller retailers or even larger shopping malls, and they're used to producing locally, so it will be new to them. And it's not that they're not open to working with that, it's just like us. Our first time sourcing a product, man, we felt like idiots. We were like, how do I even get this here? How do I ship it? How do I do? So, it's about building that relationship. It's about working together to figure it out together, to have that long-term, awesome, benefit of being able to have a supplier that's so close by. And let's talk about the language barrier. So you said you can go to Nuevo León, you can go to, Guadalajara, Mexico City. There's so many great cities. Some of the biggest concerns that people reach out to us with is, number one, language barrier. They're very concerned, and they worry about this in China as well. And number two, safety. And, I always say this because there's over 1 million expats from the United States living in Mexico. And I'm in a lot of Facebook groups where these expats, talk and commune and everything, because I too would like to live there one day. And so I'm communing with these people and talking with them. And whenever someone mentions a safety concern, these people stick up for Mexico. They're like, no, it's perfect. It's more safe than the United States. It's, but can we talk about the language barrier and also the safety concerns? So, can people just, I mean, I know because I go to Mexico City, I go to Monterrey, I go, of course, to the beaches in Cancun. That's, my favorite place to go in Mexico, but I go by myself. And I've never had a problem, and people speak English because there are so many expats in the major cities. So yeah, what's been your experience with that?
I mean, my perspective is going to be skewed because I do speak Spanish, right? But I know, people look at me and they're eager to speak English to me. Sometimes I have to let them speak English to me before at some point it goes up, oh, you speak Spanish? Yeah, I speak Spanish. So I do think it's going to be common to find people that speak English, especially in the context of someone who's a business owner. So for example, Sergio is someone I know in Torreon in northern Mexico. He has a factory that produces things out of granite and similar stones, and we're working to find a market for that in the U.S. He travels to U.S. all the time, and he speaks English perfectly well. And I think most people kind of with his profile are going to speak English perfectly well enough to have a conversation, to have a business conversation. And then, having an ally, having someone else to lean on to say, hey, maybe in this situation, I want someone to step in and translate. That's not a bad idea. But I would say you're probably in better luck here, because I think you're going to have people who either have experience in the United States and can speak the language well enough and understand the culture well enough. In China, obviously, people are always getting better, but I still struggle most of the time with the communication with people in China. Like, even though we're both speaking English, I've always felt like they don't really seem to understand what I'm saying here. I don't understand what they're saying. It's English, but I don't understand what they're trying to communicate.
Well, and in China, different yes doesn't mean yes, right? So there's different kind of ways of understanding like English and in communicating with business cultural differences. What would you say are the primary business cultural differences between the US business culture and Mexico business culture? What should we be aware of when we're doing business in Mexico? What should we be thinking about when we're maybe talking to a manufacturer or trying to build that relationship? Is there things that we should think about?
Before I answer that question, afterwards, let's circle back to the safety issue, because I do want to give some insight on that. So let's go ahead and go with kind of the differences in culture. In the United States, we do also have a little bit more ability to be more sincere and to say no. So it's still easier in an American context for us to say no. Like, hey, can you produce 10,000 of these? We're going to say, no, I can't. I can produce 6,000 and I can put my cards on the table. Whereas in the Mexican culture, they're probably going to say yes, they're probably going to say maybe, and try to figure out a way to make it work, because they don't want to lose that opportunity that they have with you. But that's if you get to that point. I think that same sincerity is something that keeps doors from opening so easily. So in the US context, you can talk to anybody and you're basically going to understand what they have to offer and what they're looking for in that first initial conversation. Nobody has any problems kind of opening up about that. Whereas in the Mexican context, things are so based on, having a strong relationship with somebody and knowing this is someone I'm going to be able to work with over the course of years and years and years, just like I've always been doing, just like this business was in my father, this was my father's business, and he sold to your father or your mother, and now I'm selling to you. And so that's a big part of how business is done here. So when someone comes in, I've had people tell me like, hey, Andrew, I just want to meet some factory owners, meet some producers, and for them to tell me what they can produce and how much they can produce. I'm like, that's never going to happen. That's not how the Mexican culture works. It's very much going to be, hey, let's talk, let's go out, let's have dinner. Maybe there's an event that we both are going to attend. Let's bring these things out little by little and build up that confidence. And I know that's a challenge, and I'm very certain that that's going to change over time, that it's going to be easier once manufacturers in Mexico, once producers in Mexico see some of this happen. So going back to these first two things that we've just talked about, or these last two things that we've just talked about, having some kind of intermediary, I think, is going to be a benefit. I think having someone that's familiar with multiple suppliers, who's already familiar with the culture, who's already established some relationships, who knows both languages, that's definitely going to be an advantage. So anyone that has that opportunity, take advantage of it.
That's why it's so important what we're doing in Mexico with the Mexico trip and EvoLatam, because we're not just bringing manufacturers, we're also educating manufacturers on how to work with us and our culture and these little changes, the things that they need to know to export, the things that they need to know. Because we found in our last event, when we educated those suppliers about us and kind of told them a little bit more about us, they're all very eager. They want to learn, they want to work with us. But, just like if we were going to China for the first time, or some other, we keep saying China, but there's plenty of other places to source from, if we were going to somewhere to source for the first time, we would be nervous. We would be like, well, I don't know what they expect. I don't know. And so the comfort level is like, let's get to know each other first, So we're trying to build that bridge by educating our manufacturers. That's why we're hosting Prevo, which is our education conference for suppliers in Mexico. And Andrew's going to be speaking at that and helping suppliers to understand how to work with us. But also at our trade shows, we also have those intermediaries there. Besides the manufacturers, of course, you can go there and you can build that relationship. And we do have people already sourcing from Mexico, from people that they met, from suppliers they met at EvoLatam. But at the same time, maybe your exact supplier, that thing that you're looking for, is not there. Or, you met a few, but you'd really like to expand in this way. That's where we have logistics companies, sourcing companies, those intermediary experts that can help. We have a supplier matching program that allows people to apply to, get connected with the right suppliers and the right intermediaries. So that's such a good, it's a good point. And it also allows me to educate people and let them know that we have you covered. If you're going to come down to Monterrey, February 15th and 16th for EvoLatam, you can sign up for free at EvoLatam.com. You're going to meet a myriad of e-commerce experts, logistics folks, lots of suppliers, intermediaries, and then we have 2 full days of conferences as well. So you're going to learn, and we have simultaneous translation. So whether the speaker on stage is speaking Spanish or English, you can, depending on your language, you can have a headset on and you'll get that delivered directly to you. And we also have translators walking the floor, although most people did not have any issues. But if there was a supplier or, somebody that wasn't as, confident in their English, I was just enjoying walking the floor. And I speak a little Spanish and I understand Spanish much better than I speak it. I'm trying to get better at that. But luckily the translators are constantly walking the floor. So we would start and kind of talk together. And then if we needed to get into a deeper conversation, to understand something a little bit more, then we would just grab a translator. And it was just a wonderful, warm experience. I actually find what you said about, them really caring about relationships and about, generations of culture and business. And I find it so heartwarming, and it's such a pleasant experience. And every time, I think about going back to Mexico for this next event, it really warms my heart. And I get so excited because everybody there was just so warm and so welcoming and just so willing to work together. And it was a totally different experience than anywhere I had been for e-commerce sourcing before.
I find, I find that I'm much more comfortable here. I enjoy it quite a bit. I think, when you live in the United States and, for better or worse, for most of the part, it's going to be better. Life is easier. You can, it's changing with time, but certainly still up to my generation. When I was 18, I was able to go out on my own and get a job and be able to support myself and take care of my life on my own. That's not as easy everywhere else. And so I think people learn to help each other out a little more. And that's kind of day-to-day life and certainly in business. When it comes down to anything I've ever done in business, I've been able to float something out there, and the business network that I have feeds things back to me. And so I do think that if you develop those relationships, if you get an ally in Mexico, you're going to be able to depend on that ally for other things. And that's 100% something that I do. I do a lot of consulting kind of pro bono, and individuals will say like, hey, Andrew, you and I've already met up a couple of times. Do I owe you anything? I say, no, you're now my contact in this part of the country. You're my contact in this industry. And that's enough for me. I know that, if I don't necessarily need seashells right now, maybe later somebody's going to need it and you're going to be the person that can help me, or you're going to help me find something else from that part of the country. I did want to go back to two other things here that I think will be helpful for everybody. First of all, the context is in the last event, I did 2 conferences and I just inverted them. One was in English, where I was explaining to people from the United States their own kind of cultural vices and how that generates challenges. And I was explaining to them the cultural vices in Mexico, the habits and the tendencies that were going to be a challenge. And then I just inverted that, did it in Spanish for people locally to say, hey, here are people coming from the United States. Here's what you need to know about them, but here's also what you need to know about yourself. And I think like here's a funny example that I would share just for people to kind of understand a little bit how there are cultural differences. One day I went to a very, very Americanized place. It was like a brew pub. It was, brewing company. It's one of those places that brews their own beer, and you can go in there and enjoy their beer and get kind of the kind of food that you would expect. It's here in Mexico, but just like in the United States. So you can get your hot wings and things like that. And the thing that came to me, I actually really love are nachos. I love nachos. And I don't know if everybody realizes this, but nachos are very much like a Texas, Northern Mexico, California kind of thing. It's not really a thing down here, but I was like, this place, since it's sort of this American style, they're going to have some good nachos. So I'm like, hey, can I get some nachos? And the waitress here just said, we don't have that. And that was the end of the conversation. That was the end of her statement. And I had to say, well, let me see the menu. Let me see what you can get. And I don't know what I ordered. But then she walked by later with some cheese fries. And I'm like, what? Why didn't you think to offer me cheese fries? And that was me being very American, because in an American context, just like in a business, it's still a business transaction. If I'm talking to the waiter and I'm somewhere in San Antonio or Kansas City or Detroit, and I say, hey, do you guys have nachos? They're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, we don't have nachos, but you know what I can get you? I can get you some cheese fries. And that's very much the sort of practical, negotiate back and forth scenario that we have.
Like the carbs with the cheese on top. It's an equal trade.
Yeah, like of course this was very similar. Or even, hey, do you guys have Coke? And it's very much in the United States, it would just be instantly, we have Pepsi. And a lot of times in Mexico, just be like, we don't have Coca-Cola. Like, well, what do you have? Oh, we have Pepsi. Well, okay, yeah, I'll take Pepsi then. And that's just kind of a little bit of a, this is what I have. I want you to come ask me, I want you to kind of pry in. So that's just a little bit of different negotiation tactics. Let me circle back to that security.
Yeah, let's talk about safety. Is it safe for people to come to Monterey and attend EvoLatam in February?
Yeah. I as much as you get a lot of violence on the news, right? I mean, that's what the news is there to report. The news, you know, the news media is going to report things that, hey, what's going on? Crazy things. You know, news is not going to report. In the last, 3 years, there hasn't been a armed robbery in whatever place. That's not how the news works. The news focuses on the things that are going to scare people because that's what we want and that's what we're going to consume on the news. So I think that skews things for the experience, right? A lot of statistical analysis that are out there, things that I've seen, a lot of anecdotes, be it the life that I live here in Mexico City, what other people, tell me about the places that they live around Mexico. And then again, also statistically, normal day-to-day life in Mexico is actually safer than most places in the United States. And to be honest, I feel completely safe. There's threats everywhere, right? I am part of an incubator in Oakland, California. I love Oakland. I love the Bay Area. But I walking around Oakland by myself, if I'm not certain where I'm at, or even sometimes when I am, I don't feel particularly safe there. And the reports of crime and things in that place are also high.
Right.
I'm not going to ignore what the elephant is. The elephant is there are large organized crime organizations that colloquial called cartels that operate in Mexico, right? And whoa, that's scary. The thing about that though is they're not there to do anything with what we're doing. If you're coming here to source illegal drugs, then you're gonna have problems. You're gonna run into. But if you're
And we
coming here
don't have any illegal drug suppliers at EvoLatam, so maybe not a good fit anyway, but
yeah. And if you're coming here to source, plastic, molds and woodwork and leather goods, that's not anything to do with those organizations. They're out doing their own thing. And I think something for us to understand is the United States also had problems with organized crime for the first half of the 20th century. There were Italian mafias, Irish mafia, the Dixie mafia, all operating, all had organizations pretty similar to the ones that exist mostly in northern Mexico now, that didn't prevent other people from doing business and going about their day-to-day lives. But it was scary, and it was an issue that had to be dealt with, just like this issue has to be dealt with. And we're all looking forward to that no longer being something on our mind, but it's absolutely not at all a part of my life. I live here 9 to 10 months of the year, and I never encounter any kind of violent crime.
Yeah, and I think that what's really important to note as well is any big city that you go to around the world, you should be concerned about petty theft. You should be concerned about, like you were saying, walking around Oakland, like if I don't know where I am, like I'm not going to be like, oh, I've been safe here before. Like you're going to be on guard. You're going to look around, you're going to be careful. You're going to look at your transportation, all that kind of stuff. So, anytime that you travel and you go to a big city, you're not going to go walk down a dark alley by yourself. That's just not smart anywhere in the US, in Mexico, in Canada, wherever you go, it doesn't matter. Exactly. So it's just those common sense things. And I know for our folks, you can come to the Monterrey airport very easily. You can there's Uber, there's taxis, there's plenty of safe transportation. There's wonderful hotels, like just in the view is amazing. Monterrey has an amazing manufacturing history, and you see that at the parks. Like we were walking in the parks, and you see it everywhere. It's beautiful there. It's worth the trip. It's worth discovering. So speaking of that takes us to, I think, our last question for the day, and that is, who should consider, when it comes to, if I'm in e-commerce, I'm a, business owner, whether I'm doing the wholesale model on Amazon, or I'm a reseller, or I have a private label brand, or I have a Shopify, e-commerce, and I'm not on Amazon at all, or I'm a small retailer. We had some small retailers come with us last time, or I'm a larger retailer or a larger brand. Who should consider visiting this trade show? Who should consider Mexico as a sourcing destination, and why?
Really? Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to exclude anybody, right? I think that whether you are looking for, things etched on wood, or you're looking for a complicated electronic product, there are people who can produce that here. And, you have to be willing to explore and get to know people. You might not, put in your first order before you leave to the airport to go back, but you're going to make contacts that can be helpful in the future, whether it be the person who's going to source it, or it's going to be somebody that you can rely on for logistics or something in the future. You're going to have someone. I mean, that was my experience. I didn't walk away with, here's the new person who's going to be making this thing for me. I have a lot of business cards and a lot of people that I've talked to that I know I can rely on in the future. And then I've talked to some other people about some other things. It's also a really fun e-commerce event. So, there's plenty of people that I met that have their, analytical software, and who, people who you can outsource your listings to, and all kinds of, different things that I met there. I think, this is definitely something that's in for the long haul. It's definitely something that is building and growing. I would invite everybody to come be in on the ground floor, to come be one of the first people who starts to, source things as this explodes. Another thing that I do think is interesting, one of the things that I've been looking at, and one of the things that I sometimes do on a small scale, because that's kind of where my heart is right now, but that's just finding somebody that has already established a product here in Mexico and helping them to expand it and find a market in the US. If you are already someone who is, I'm a skilled Amazon seller, I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel for every new product. I don't want a private label. I just want to resell something. There are a lot of interesting brands here that already have great branding. They have great marketing people behind it, and they're really high quality, very cool products. There are shoes. There are a lot of clothing labels that, my conversations with these individuals and some of them that I've worked with, jewelry is,
print, and there's so much. I found so many of those opportunities, and we had a lot of these brands at the trade show, and it was just so cool, lots of really great products that I could sell the heck out of.
I mean, there are a lot of people, so for example, Mexico City is this giant city. It's a city that attracts people from all around the world. The kind of trendy area is a place where probably half of the people that live there are digital nomads from the States and Europe. And there are these small shops that sell really, really cool accessories and really cool beauty products. I'm trying to think of what else, home decor things. And they depend probably entirely on their walk-in sales. And sometimes it's like, dude, this is so cool. There are people in Des Moines, Iowa, and Jacksonville, Florida that would want this. We need to get you online. And, the cool thing is that infrastructure is building here. So, someone who says, I don't necessarily need to source any products. I already have my line of products. I already know what I'm doing. Well, what if, you just add a product that's already existing into your portfolio? So there's
and imagine if you're doing wholesale. I used to do a wholesale Amazon model, right? And that's where you buy from, you buy either from wholesalers, or you buy at a wholesale price from a brand, right? And then you resell that on Amazon in your store. I used to do that. And the problem would be that everybody had the same sources as me. So, I would create a new listing, a new bundle, something cool and different. And 2 days later, I'd have three other people on the listing that I spent time and money and energy creating. And I thought I had protected sources, and nope, I did not, because, it was so easy for other people to just jump on my listing and do all of that. if you are sourcing from Mexico and you're sourcing from a brand like you're talking about that already exists, that already has great branding, all you're doing is changing the language up, and you get the photos, you get everything there, the chances of someone else competing with you and being able to find your source are really slim. So whether you're a private label seller and you want to just grow your brand, like if I find other people who sell similar products, I can either white label those over to my brand, or I can open up open up another aspect of my store and start selling other things. So it's like something for everyone in the contacts that you make. And as you mentioned, I'm so glad you mentioned it. It's so much fun. So, I can't wait to go back. I'm really I get all excited thinking about it. So just before we wrap up, I'm going to give you guys the details. We have 2 events happening here in February. Andrew is going to be at both of them. So excited to have him. The first event is our Mexico sourcing trip. And this is for the folks that want to come to Mexico and have the full experience. We pick you up at the airport with a sign, you're treated as a VIP, you get brought to the hotel, and then we have 3 days of conferences, all about not just learning how to source in Mexico and learning how to do business in Mexico, but we also do some really fun like product research strategies and different type of e-commerce topics. And then every day we do something different. So like the first night we do this amazing gala dinner, and we're doing it at a really cool place in Monterrey this time. And it is going to blow your mind. It has to do with manufacturing, but I promise you, you've never been to a gala dinner like this before. So we'll be doing that the first night. It's all inclusive, all your meals, all your hotels, everything is covered. All your activities. And then we also do tourism activities together. So we go and, we have a couple of tourist activities that we do together. We go see the sites, we experience the culture, which what better way to do that than with your fellow entrepreneurs? The last time we got a touring bus in Mexico City, and all of us got on the bus and we drove around the city and just had a great time getting off at different stops and taking pictures together. And then the next thing, we do conferences every day, as I mentioned. And then the last day before the trade show, we actually go and we visit factories. So this last time, Andrew actually introduced us to the factory that we visited this last time. Beautiful ceramics factory, beautiful family. And so this time we'll be visiting 2 factories in Monterrey, and just getting to experience a factory tour is so unique, so cool. I never get tired of it. Every time I get to walk through a factory, I'm just like, so nerdy. I love it. So that's what you can expect there. Again, we do meals together, breakfasts, lunch, dinners. We do different dinners both at the hotel and outside of the hotel, just to get everybody kind of moving around and having fun. And then the last 2 days, we attend the EvoLatam Expo. And if you come as part of the Mexico trip, you're a VIP there, and you have, your VIP lunch and everything like that. But then you get to meet all of the thousands of people that come from around the world to attend the expo. And if you want to attend the expo, you can go to EvoLatam.com and sign up for free to attend. And you get to meet your suppliers, your vendors there, your third-party logistics, e-commerce providers, everything like that. And we do that for 2 days. So this year it's even bigger and better. And we have manufacturers and suppliers from so many different categories. You can check out all the different categories at EvoLatam.com. And then if you'd like to upgrade your sourcing experience and join us on the Mexico trip, that is at themexicotrip.com. I know that's really hard to remember, themexicotrip.com. So excited to see you, Andrew. Thank you so much for, imparting your experience and knowledge and just, hanging out with me today.
You're very welcome. I look forward to seeing everyone there. Monterrey is where I lived and studied for several years. I think everybody's going to be very pleasantly surprised with what kind of place it is and what kind of options there are as far as sourcers. So great. See everyone there.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. See you there.